This evening, we will be welcoming Dr. Frederick Ayuke and Dr. Kofi Boa. I think two of Africa's most important and overlooked resources, the soil, but even more importantly, the people. And tonight we're discovering two wonderful experts again. And to introduce them and to facilitate the session tonight, I am going to hand over to my young colleague in Rwanda. And Robert, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Johan. My name is Robert Ganzamori, as he said, and I'm going to be a moderator for tonight's panel discussion. We're going to look into how we as Africans will achieve food security while preserving soil and holding in mind that it should be sustainable. With our topic of discussion being, how will Africa's food security hold up against climate change's worldwide reach? I was fortunate enough to be taught by the two speakers tonight at the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, so I know how insightful they are, and I very much look forward to our discussion tonight. Dr. Frederick Ayuke holds a doctoral degree in soil biology from Wageningen University and has been a consultant for different organizations like AGRA, FAO, and SEAT. So if you need a consultant with soil biology skills, I believe Dr. Ayuke is the best person I know. Dr. Kofi Boa is a PhD agronomist from University of Nebraska-Lincoln, research scientist, founder, and executive director of Howard G. Buffett Foundation, Center for No-Till Agriculture in Ghana, and most importantly, he's a farmer. He's the best conservation agriculture extensionist I ever met, and so if you need any extensionist, he's the best person to go for. Dr. Ayuke would like to first share with us a small presentation on the topic, and after we'll dive into the panel discussion. Dr. Ayuke, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Robert, and the team. Thank you very much, everybody, and welcome to the presentation I'll make. I'll be very brief on this one, and one of the things is that thank you for the invitation, and most also honored to have Dr. Boa. We call him Farmer Boa as well, and he's been a great colleague here at RICA, and actually in most cases we learn much or more from him. So we have been collaborating very, very greatly in this mission in promoting the conservation of agriculture. So we have been learning more from him. I will say that is also apart from the fact that we are all scientists and farmers who actually share the same vision to help in the conservation work and more so promote conservation agriculture. I would actually call him as a mentor in this field of conservation agriculture. So in my presentation today, I will actually be very brief because I know that we have greatly Dr. Kofi Boa will give more insight into this aspect of conservation agriculture. But then when we are talking about the climate change and we're trying to look at making a connection against the background of climate change or in view of climate change, then we consider conservation agriculture as one of the most important things to do in our agricultural system. So maybe in a brief, conservation agriculture, actually we can define it as an ecosystem approach to regenerative and sustainable agriculture and land use management. So I know in many cases people might have different names, but when you talk about regenerative agriculture, we are still talking about the same thing. This is conservation agriculture. So that approach, our ecosystem approach, to ensuring that we have a regenerative, sustainable agriculture and land use management is what entails conservation agriculture. So conservation agriculture is a component of climate smart agriculture. So when we talk about the climate smart agriculture and the principles of conservation, climate smart agriculture, then the most important component of this is actually CA, or conservation agriculture. So what is climate smart agriculture? This is actually an approach as well that helps us to guide our actions, what we need to do. And why are we doing this? We are talking about transforming and reorienting our agricultural systems to effectively support, develop, and ensure food security in a changing climate. So when we talk about the climate change, we are talking about the problems and the issues that are coming up as a result of climate change. Then we talk about ways in which we can actually reorient and transform our agricultural production and agricultural systems so that we ensure food security. Then we are talking about climate smart agriculture. And we appreciate deeply that conservation agriculture is actually an important component of climate smart agriculture. So I will talk briefly about the key principles of conservation agriculture, what is actually advocated for by FAO, what we do, and also at RICA, what is it that we actually do differently? Or as we talk about the conservation agriculture, how do we also come in to ensure that what we are doing is not in vain? Because I believe that Kofi Boa will be able to tell you as well that conservation agriculture in itself, when you talk about the principles that are defined, the key three principles that we talk about, one of them, the FAO talking about that in order that we might need to maintain our soil quality to ensure productivity, crop production, and also ensure that we enhance food security, we cannot actually look at these things in isolation. So, for instance, when you talk about that we are looking for ways in which we can maintain our soil quality, then one of the things that we need to do is to ensure that we minimize tillage or we reduce the soil disturbance. Another thing is actually to ensure that we maintain soil cover. This one could be permanently, this one could also be over a period of time, but we ensure that we actually have got a cover. But we can also have to start from some point. And then another key principle is to ensure that we diversify our cropping systems. So diversifying the cropping system, I believe also during the time, then we'll talk about the interactions, then Kofi Boa will also be able to maintain and also emphasize on how do we do this. So we talk about, first of all, ensuring that we minimize our soil disturbance or reduce the soil disturbance in our soil systems. We also ensure that we maintain cover, because these ones are actually important, and I believe it will be coming up much later during the time we'll be having our discussions. Then we talk about diversifying our cropping system, either through rotation or intercropping. Now, at RICA, we are going further than this. And we appreciate that. We also need to have other inputs. Could be organic through our cover, dead mulch. But then when we apply this input, be it organic or inorganic, then we should base this one on the potential for economic response. That when we do this, when we come in with these interventions, when we come in with these inputs, then we have the potential that we are going to have good crop growth and we are going to have good crop yield. So in other words, we also look at the agronomic practices alongside this. Two, that when we are using pesticides, because when we are talking about minimizing the soil disturbance, Kofi Boa will tell you that one of the ways in which you can do this is to use herbicides to control the weeds before you do the planting. And then when we are actually using the pesticide, because certain times also we appreciate that some of these practices that we have, they too can attract pests. And when we are doing this, and we are thinking that we should be using the pesticide, then we could be basing this one on a chronic threshold, such that if we don't do anything, we don't take any interventional measures, then we are likely to lose the crop. Then we can do this one as a part of integrated pest management. Also, when we are doing irrigation, we are supplying water to our crops. We should base this one on crop use efficiency, crop use and water use efficiency, so that we ensure that we actually maximize water use and also we maximize the profit. We are also thinking about crop livestock integration systems. And in this case, we actually talk about managing our livestock and cropping system to minimize the impact and effect of human and animal health. So, for instance, we appreciate that in the livestock system, the production of cow dung itself is also a source of the greenhouse gases. Then, in that case, how do we ensure that we protect our environment and we also sustain the livestock production? This is where now we can also be talking about the biogas production. Alongside the biogas production, we also produce the compost and we also produce the manure, which we can also use on farm. Through this, we can also appreciate that the crop systems will also be benefiting. The livestock also can also benefit from the raw and forage crops that will also be grown on farm. And alongside this, when you can talk about efficiently integrating the use of manure coming from this livestock system to also enhance our crop growth. We are also encouraging utilization of the byproducts from agriculture and also from the food processing, so that we ensure that we save as much as possible. One system is used to feed on the other system. And through this utilization, we know that even sometimes when we talk about poultry, because we also have the poultry enterprise at RICA, then how do we make use of the residues, the waste that are coming from the poultry farm? And even the processing, food processing. We process the food, we have meat, we have bones coming in from that system. How do we make use of that? These are some of the things that we can also be thinking. And as long as we do this, and we are involved in the crop livestock production, then we should also be thinking about our biodiversity. That in all this that we think of, how do we enhance our soil biodiversity, how do we value, and how do we encompass this in time? So these are some of the principles that we actually look at. And when we talk about the climate change, we talk about the effect of climate change, then these are some of the practices and some of the things that we should be talking about. So this is something that, courtesy of Dr. Boa, when you talk about the conservation agriculture concepts here, we talk about the reduced soil disturbance here, then we think about either the no-till or minimum or reduced tillage. So this is actually something that we've actually been doing here at RICA, and Kofi Boa has also been very instrumental in ensuring that we actually do this, because part of what you are seeing on the slide there, these are some of the systems, some of the things that Dr. Boa has been doing with the farmers. And we are trying to teach our students how to do this, and we are trying to inculcate to them the conservation agriculture concept that they will take with them, and they're going to take, because they are going to be in different enterprises in different domains, among which we also have got the extension activities. So that's also one way in which they actually go with this. Then we have permanent soil cover, and this is what we actually have, and Dr. Boa has been doing this one much more again. We are also, he helped us get some of even the seeds and get some of the techniques, so we can have the cover either through the living plant material or dead or mulch. So we can have the dead mulch and we incorporate this one into our soils. Crop diversification can be through either through crop rotation, or it can be through also intercropping. So we need to just balance what is it that is actually giving us the best bet in terms of the practices, and what is it that farmers actually benefit. So in Rwanda here, there are quite a number of challenges that farmers do experience, but one of the things that we know is that most of them like intercropping. So if that is actually one of the attractive options in terms of crop diversification, how do we promote that? Because their land's acreage is actually very small. But on the other hand, we also have got well-endowed farmers in terms of resources who can also have the luxury also of enhancing and doing the crop rotation. So how can they enhance this? So then we also have got the crop livestock integration. This one, of course, I've mentioned. This is where the byproduct from one system becomes the input for the other system. And in that case, we also look at ways in which we can enhance biodiversity. So with that, I will actually leave it that we'll be able to discuss more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayuke. Thank you for enlightening us on the definitions, the principles of conservation agriculture, and how we can orient our agriculture system in regards to climate smart agriculture. Dr. Kofi, if you don't mind, I would love for you to tell the audience your story and how you got into the field of conservation agriculture. I know it's interesting, and I would love the audience to know as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Robert. And Frederick, it's good seeing you again.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sure. Yes, Robert, you know it. I mean, for me, you know so much about me. I eat conservation agriculture. I smell it. Everything about me is conservation agriculture. And people wonder how I came into this. I'll make the story very brief. What really happened is that my parents were farmers. And at the age of 10, my father died, and we are 4 boys. So at 12, I was left alone in the house with my mother. And what happened then was, in those days, we would go to school in the morning, come back and go in the afternoon. And anytime I returned from school in the afternoon, my mother was back home. But on one day, about 4:30, and my mother was not home from the farm. And as late as 7, she wasn't back. About 7:30, somebody whispered into my ears that my mother was still on the farm, and that she had gone with the men around to quench fire on her only cocoa farm that was our source of livelihood. So at about 10 p.m. in the night, in the village, my mother came in the darkness of the village crying, and the entire cocoa farm was on fire. It had been burnt to ashes, all because a neighbor had gone to clear a field adjacent to my mother's farm to grow maize, set fire, and slashing and burning had been the main practice of land preparation. He was able to put the fire up, all right, but not knowing there was a dead root that caught fire and ran under the soil into my mother's cocoa farm, and that sparked the fire. And so after that, life became very difficult, especially for me, the youngest child in the family. So at that time, I was hanging out with friends. And one night, I told my friends that I needed to go back to my mother. Until now, I don't know what actually pushed me to do that. So they insisted they wouldn't let me go, but I said I would go. So finally, they got fed up and said, let him go. I knocked at my mother's door in the night. Are you fighting? I said, no. That I have come to give you a promise. And as to how that happened, I still do not understand. And I looked into her face and said, Mom, I want to give you a promise. And the promise is that I'm going to spend the whole of my life to fight the use of fire on the farmland so that no child of my age ever suffers what I'm going through now. My mother looked into my face and said, "Thank you, God bless you." And since that time, at the age of 12, I committed myself to this cause. And now I can say for sure that I'm almost there. Looking at the number of people that I have impacted on and all that. So this is what brought about the whole thing. And so I say that I got into this out of tragedy. And for me, it was a divine one. Now, thank God, with the help of people and others, several people, colleagues, I've been able to build myself so much in terms of the theory and practice of conservation agriculture. And I am forever committed to sharing my experience, knowledge, expertise. And it is my hope that the whole of Africa one day will go CA to sustain the productivity of our lands and to ensure food security forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Kofi. That's very inspiring. Most of us have dreams when you're young, but to attain them is another story. So you talked about how you set yourself on a target of influencing different farmers, and Dr. Kofi talked about different theories in conservation agriculture. But my question is, on what extent does the farmers you work with, for instance, in the Center for No-Till Agriculture in Ghana, on what extent do they know the theories of conservation agriculture, and how can you say that on what level are they putting in practice these theories?
Okay, very interesting. What is happening is that farmers around my place are no different from several farmers across Africa. And, you know, Africa has been fed by smallholder farmers for decades. And this is going to continue deep into the future. But you see, one unique characteristic of the smallholder farmer in Africa is that, sorry to say, they have limited education. And they are not the sort of people that you can hand over research notes, peer review papers, and refer them to the internet to make sense out of what people have written in terms of papers, in terms of several publications, speak to them. But you see, we are faced with the realities of climate change. And there's got to be a change in the way we do our things, more especially farming. And so the question arises as to how then do we get these people to appreciate the change? And mind you, I just said that you cannot rely on publications and things. So this group of farmers, of which I'm one, because I'm also a smallholder farmer, what happens is that for us, seeing is the truth. Seeing is not believing, but seeing is the truth. And so for us to be able to make a change, we have to create opportunity for farmers to actually feel it, to see it, to feel it, and then go for it. Because at CNTA, our principle is that you will never ever sound convincing enough to our smallholder farmers if you have nothing to show. And so the trick has been to set up this center to build the understanding of the concept of CA, to build farmers' understanding of the concept of CA. In fact, all that we have done is to bring knowledge to practice. And that is the underlying thing. Bringing knowledge to practice in a way, in a form that the smallholder farmer, illiterate farmer will be able to see it, understand, and appreciate. And so we build their understanding of the concept and principles of CA. And then we show them on the ground evidence. So they get to understand it. But they have to believe, they have to have the confidence that really it works. And so we have set up this center, which is doing a whole lot of things. There are several systems growing. And so from wherever, either from the dry land, from the humid land, from the transitional area, when you are there, you get to see whatever is happening at your place, and you see the evidence that it works. So building their understanding of the concept of CA, showing them evidence. Then we go further to teach them hands-on practices so that they will be empowered to do that on their own, on their fields. And through this, we are able to get a commitment. And I tell you, if you are to speak to several of these farmers, most of whom cannot even write their name, and they begin to talk about CA and bring you into science, and then the benefits, the processes, you wonder. And so this is how come we've been able to get farmers to actually see, take it, and do it.
Sorry,
The
Dr.
case in
Kofi.
point is there was the communities around where we work. I mean, this is an undulating, but then what really has happened is that, you know, I just talked about slash and burn, and on these undulating fields, it was all about slashing and burning, and there had been an influx of people from a tomato growing area where they had exhausted the land, and they migrated to our place, and they kept buying fields. And so about a decade and a half ago, I got the opportunity to speak at a community thereby, and I urged people to stop giving their lands to these people because, one, they were making ridges down the slope, they were just taking up all vegetation, and there was so much erosion. And I mentioned to these people that they were heading for trouble. And true to that, 2-3 years, when the soils got exhausted, these migrant farmers left. And so that was when the realities came. In these days of climate change, prolonged drought, people were not able to grow anything anymore. And when the rains came in torrents, washing away the topsoil, and so there was problem. Hunger, because they could not produce anything. Even cassava, which is a very tough crop, was struggling to exist. And so setting up this center within those communities, all that we did was to ensure that we bring in the CA practices, as my good friend Dr. Ayuke enlightened us on. And then we started bringing farmers from near and far to see. Now they got to see the difference and started coming on. And now I tell you, within the area, you can never talk about hunger 365 days of the year. When people are crying all over, and when weather conditions are bad all over, people are still growing and making so much from the fields, selling, and several other things. So they are able to produce beyond their immediate needs and are selling, creating opportunities for enhanced livelihood. So what has happened is that through this process, people have come back to realize that yes, there is something called CA, which holds the key to sustainable use of the land, empowering them in terms of being able to stand up against climate change and producing enough to feed themselves and having enough to sell. And so all I'm saying is that to empower these farmers, this group of farmers, we need to work with them on the ground. And it is about time a lot of researchers come with us to kick the death out there with the farmers. at this point, there's been so much done in terms of research. You go to several universities, several research institutes, there is a pile of knowledge in the shelves full of dust. This knowledge has to filter to the farmers. And so all I'm saying is that whoever that is there, looking at empowering the practitioners, the farmers, to be able to resist climate, to build resilience in their production systems, has to invest in bringing that knowledge to practice, because that is what we need. Of course, I'm not saying we don't need research. We need research, but there is a lot that is known already, which is not being applied on the farm for lack of the fact that the farmers even don't know about it. So once again, we will never ever sound convincing enough and get these farmers on board to put themselves to build resilience in their systems to fight, to mitigate climate change. All that we need to do is show them the evidence, get them convinced, they will put themselves together and do the needful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boa. I think that's a call for action. If we want to help farmers, then we need to move from theories to practices, show them instead of telling them. I would say to the audience that if you have any question, you can type it into the chat section and we'll get back to it in 17 minutes. Dr. Ayuke, if you don't mind, some people take climate change as something political, which is not there. I would like to ask you, what are some effects of climate change on soil health in Africa? And if you don't mind, again, if you have any case study of a research or another project that you worked on and they illustrates the impact of conservation agriculture, you can share it with us as we look into the effects of climate change on soil health in Africa.
Thank you very much, Robert. At least Dr. Boa has mentioned the effect of climate change. And, you know, this is actually about our actions, what we are doing and how we are behaving. And we can make it or we can destroy it. But then there are certain aspects here that we can also, we can avoid. There are certain ones that we can maybe say are unavoidable, but the ones that are actually man-made are actually avoidable. And when you talk about conservation agriculture in the context of climate change and what is actually happening around us here, then you find that we need to actually think about how do we manage our ecosystems and what kind of inputs do we have? How are our actions contributing to these problems that we actually have? For instance, when we talk about the soil aspect, Dr. Boa has actually mentioned to you that among the things that they had in their area were bad practices, especially from those immigrant farmers. And they were not actually taking care of these soils in the most ideal way. So we can actually think of soil as ourselves. That when you talk about the climate change, what is it that is actually causing that climate change? We talk about the greenhouse gas emissions. What is actually coming from this greenhouse? What is actually contributing to the greenhouse gases? For instance, Kofi Boa is also mentioning about the slash and burn practices, which are actually very common in many of the countries. And especially in the Sahel, you will actually concur with me, I believe, that people actually believe that some of the crops that you grow, like the cocoa and some of those other crops, you need to do slash and burn. When you do the burning, you are actually emitting carbon dioxide. But when you emit the carbon dioxide, this being one of the greenhouse gases, is contributing to the ozone depletion. And then we actually have got the global warming coming in as a result, and then the climate change coming into effect. But when we actually practice, like we say, we do permanent soil cover, and we add organic mulch into our soils, we leave crop residues resident on our farms, what are we doing? One of the things that will actually be coming up is carbon sequestration, carbon storage in our soils. Actually, many research have actually shown that soil is actually one of those environment, part of the ecosystem that are capable of storing a lot of carbon. And this carbon in itself, that are stored in the form of organic matter, in the form of humus, they are also sources of food to our organisms. And these organisms, they are also part of what is contributing to the carbon sequestration. For instance, part of my PhD work was based on soil biodiversity. I was studying a lot of earthworm activities and termite activities and how they contributed to the carbon and nitrogen dynamics within the soil. And I did a lot of work. I collected a lot of samples, soil sample, earthworm samples in both East, Central, and West Africa. Actually, I worked in one of Kofi Boa's environment, Tamale, in the northern part of Ghana. I was in Burkina Faso. I was in Ibadan, Nigeria. I worked in Niger, Malawi, and some other sites in Kenya. But then one of the things that came up was that in some of those systems, because we are looking at the conservation agriculture practices, where we are talking about the crop rotation, we look at the intercropping as well as part of the crop diversification. We are looking at the permanent soil cover, and when we also look at the minimum soil disturbance. One of the things that came up from my study is that in those environments where we had more and more earthworms, in the earthworm cast, we had more carbon and nitrogen being embedded in those casts, even more than the whole soils, more than the environmental soil, because we were looking at the whole soil. We were looking at macro aggregates in these soils. We were looking at micro aggregates within the macro aggregates. And those micro aggregates within the macro aggregates, that is where we realized that the earthworms were actually taking the carbon materials, and this was actually in the cast. So when you look at it, you find that soil in itself is actually a big, big reservoir of the carbon storage in the form of organic matter. So when you talk about the climate change, and we're trying to look at our soils, the soils will also look at us differently. And then they say, please treat me in the way you treat yourself. When you are sick, you go to hospital, you look for medicine. When I'm sick, why don't you take care of me? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ayuke. It's amazing that soil can be a shelter to carbon. Many researchers do not cover that, but it's amazing that you talked about it. So Dr. Boa, if you don't mind, I know you are so much invested in African tradition and how we have to maintain it so that we can easily understand conservation agriculture. If you don't mind, can you touch on the social aspect of Africans and how the disconnection between African societies and their traditional eco-philosophies influence how we do our normal farming?
Good. Robert, thank you very much for bringing this subject up. It's so dear to my heart. And it's good that we talk about it openly for people to actually realize what is happening. Before I do that, all that I want to say as a follow-up to what Frederick talked about is that for us, we abuse soil because we think that the soil belongs to us. We abuse the soil, we abuse the environment because we think that the environment is ours The soil is ours, and therefore we can do whatever we like. But this is never the case. We belong within the environment, just as all other entities, the rivers, the trees, the animal species, or whatever. And so, if we neglect the fact that we belong within the environment, just like all the other entities, we will lose out on the care and respect for all the other planetary systems, and we will be doomed. And that is what is happening. Now, I want you to appreciate the fact that the African is very ecocentric. The African, for years, millennia, is tied to nature. And this is why people believe, a lot of people coming from outside, and even our scholars who think that there's a disconnection between us, believe that we are primitive. Never the case. You see, Africa and Africans, as I said, we are so much tied to nature, and therefore we have intimate ties with the natural elements. We are part of that. The trees are part of that. The animals are part of that. The rivers are part of that. And so we Africans, recognizing that all of us belong within the natural system, has or made it such that we had so much respect for all this, and therefore we were mistakenly treated as people who were worshiping idols, trees, rivers. Far from that. You see, the belief that we have, that our ancestors left for us, some of us still hold fast onto that, and that is what has changed our lives. The African, again, is very much ecocentric. Now, look at what is happening. Everybody is talking about climate change and its negative impact on the environment, on everything that we are experiencing now. It never used to be the case in Africa. Several parts of Africa, decades and decades ago. Now, within several African communities, we have reserves that are called sacred groups. And you see, what happened was that all these were impacting on the environment. So these sacred groups were set aside as places where the gods lived. And therefore, if you go there, tragedy will befall you. And we, believing in that, stayed away. So the trees could grow, the monkeys could roam around freely, the birds could fly. There was preservation of biodiversity. And I remember when I was a child, living in the village, we will play, especially during the days when the moon was up, we will play so much deep into the night, about 10 p.m. And we'll get so heated up. But before we go to sleep, we will go to about 10 meters away from the sacred group, and there we will sit down. To do what? We will sit down to cool ourselves. There was no fan, no air conditioning. But within 10 meters from the sacred group, man, you could feel it, that you were relieved before we go to sleep. Now, it was a fear put into us that nobody should go in there to cut any tree, to kill any animal, to do anything, so that it could continue to serve the purpose of environmental moderation. But then Christianity came and said to us, modernization came and said to us, you are primitive. There is nothing there. Go there. Churches went there, people went there, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, all these things got abundant. We destroyed all this, and now we are having the negative impact. And this is when this is the time when we are going back to say, go plant trees, go do all that, when all these things were there. So you see, the fact is that there was nothing sacred about that, but they needed to find a way of putting fear in us so that we could stay out. Now, in your house, if you have a child and you tell the child not to go to the east part because there is a monster and children fear monsters, they will never ever go there. Even though there might not be any monster, because of the fear of monster, they will never go there. And so this is what happened to us. Our ancestors put that fear in us not to go there so that we could preserve that. Now there are several clans in Africa, and each clan has a totemic animal or a totemic plant or a totemic stream. And we treat those with so much respect. And so the different clans having different totemic plants, having different totemic animals, come to a point where no matter what, species are preserved. Because if my clan, we kill parrots, and your clan preserved parrots, what happens is that we can kill them and they get extinct here, but they will still be living, flourishing, multiplying in your place. So total decimation of biodiversity was never ever going to happen. But then when we begin to have that much respect for this, we are treated as being primitive, and we needed to be modern. And so let us kill all of this. You know, in those days, now we are talking, we are fighting, so serious. Now people go to the farmlands and they don't have good drinking water. But in several communities in those days, each community, there was a day set aside as a taboo day for which nobody goes to the farmland. And that was a way of allowing the wildlife to get free time to roam around, because during the other times, they are restricted, they fear, they will be caught, they will be killed. But on this taboo day, when it is so calm, because there is no human influence in there, that is the time they are able to move around and build stock, food stuff in their hiding places, so that if they are not able to go out for fear of being killed, they can live on. And so there was so much that one could see as traces of wildlife in there. And more importantly, the springs, when farmers go out there during the day to drink or whatever, the springs get depleted. And you ask yourself, how do these animals get water? And so staying out of the farmland on just one single day allowed the springs to recharge. And water, spring water coming from the rocks, I mean, there is no so healthy than that. These days, where do you find this? But when we, our forefathers, for our parents, put that fear in us, and we believed it, adhered to that, and got it to work, then came modernization. Then Christianity came and said, no, this is bad. You are primitive. And because we want to be modern, this is what has happened. And then we are told that the Bible tells us that we have dominion over everything. And therefore we can do whatever within the environment. But then the African, being so much ecocentric, realized that no, we cannot just do anything because we belong within the environment just like all the other entities. But what has happened these days, Christianity and modernization have brought us to a point that we are very close to environmental decimation. And now the wake-up call is there, exacerbated by climate change, and we are panicking, spending so much money. If we had lived as Africans with our ties to nature and having so much respect for certain types of trees, certain types of animals and others, these things wouldn't have happened. Look at the cemetery. We were told that the Cook ghost resides in the cemetery and therefore no child should go there. It is a sacred place. It's so scary. And when in those days, when they were even going to bury people, they would just cut a small path and it was only men who would go in there. We were not cutting the trees. So, and these cemeteries close to the communities were moderating the immediate environment. But then we needed to build tombs. We needed to gravel the cemetery, causing so much reflection from sunlight and losing out on carbon sequestration and all that. And those days, we were touted as primitive. We were touted as people that did not know anything. But I tell you, we were doing all these things. These were given to us. And so the African eco-philosophy is something that should be held tightly, we going back to it. And so those of us that have preached that malfeasance, we should be guilty of ourselves. We should bury our head in shame and go let people realize that we Africans, we are very much ecocentric and that we have been lied to. We need to uphold our eco-philosophy through which we can bring sanity into the environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kofi. I think Africans were even scientists before even modernization and Christianity, from what you said. Thank you very much. I think we went beyond time and we can go ahead and listen to the audience and maybe you can answer their questions. I think we can start from Tom Tochaman. If you can unmute yourself and ask your questions.
Very good. Thank you, Robert. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentations. Outstanding. I'm a total believer in everything you've talked about so far, especially the no-till farming. I have an NGO that's working in Kenya in the Mara neighborhood, and we're working at 2 different schools. One of the things that we're going to launch real soon are shambas, gardens that are scaled large enough to feed the entire school populations. And so we want to do this climate resilient type farming techniques and use those sorts of techniques. So I'm wondering, but one of the things we're running into is convincing the folks, the local folks, to give up the tractor and plow. And, you know, this is a 5-acre shamba, perhaps. And so, you know, they can plow and seed a 5-acre piece of land in 30 minutes versus the no-till farming. How do I impress upon them that it's in their benefit or best interest to give up the tractor and plow? The second question has to do with water conservation. These are arid neighborhoods, not like Rwanda and where your campus is. So what are your thoughts on best low-tech systems for water conservation for these shambas? Thank you.
Well, this is interesting. You see, when I was speaking, the key point was, what is it that we have to show farmers that they can see repeatedly? Because now the talking has been too much and farmers do not believe the talks. Now we have also been made to believe that if you don't plow the soil, you cannot grow anything. But what people should realize that several places around their farms that are not plowed, year after year, weeds grow. And so, how does that happen? People are using the plow to defend themselves using the aeration theory that you need to plow to allow air to go in. If that is so, then all around us, wherever the plow has not touched, one should not be able to see a single weed growing. That alone diffuses the aeration theory. But more importantly, you have a unique opportunity to show people the different way of doing it. In these gardens, let us commit ourselves to not plowing, but rather ensure that we are able to build some cover, organic, some residue retention, waste from the house, from the kitchen, whatever. The more and more we pile this, the more and more we begin to have biology taking over. And the moment biology takes over, everything is done, because biology influences the physical and chemical properties as well. And so what we have to do is we have the opportunity to showcase the no plow thing. And as we do it, let us expose ourselves, expose what we are doing to the people, for them to walk through with us, to see the difference. And so this is where I say that for us at the Center for No-Till Agriculture, we say that you will never ever sound convincing enough if you have nothing to show. In this case, we are getting the opportunity to showcase the different thing. And you are not the one that is going to sit down and talk and talk. Their eyes will talk for them. They will see it, and you'll be surprised that people will come and shake your hand that, yes, it has taken us too long to appreciate this. Now we are for it. Go for that. Yes, the arid world, very little water. But you see, we are not saying CA will seed water, but CA will make it possible for us to utilize water efficiently. And you see people background and committing themselves to irrigation. We're wasting our time. You put the water in the morning, by late afternoon, everything is gone. And so the trick is being able to have at least some little cover and not working the soil. And especially where people are planting vegetables. All that we do is we call something a cap planting. It's an imaginary cap in the soil, like it's a very small basin, a depressed hole. We put a seedling in, and the little amount of water that you put there never goes anywhere but stays at the base of the plant. And so with just a little bit of mulch, you'll be surprised that you are not going to be watering that much. There was a time I engaged with some farmers in the northern part of Mali, and they were being supported by an NGO that has built a borehole within the garden, women garden. And the women were taking turns every day. Some will go in the morning to water, others will come in the evening to water. And it was daily, no matter what. They had to go in the morning and the evening. And what I realized was they were the field naked and piling the residue around the fringes of the garden. Then I said, no, let us bring this to mulch just around the plants. And then you continue to do your 2 times a day watering on these plants. But then For the mulched plants, water once a day, and for another option, water once every 3 days. And I left them. Not long before that, they started sending messages to me that this is wonderful. Plots that were watered once every 3 days were doing better, several times better than plots that they were watering every day because of the mulch. And of course, even the ones that they were watering every day, once a day with the mulch, was just performing as good as watering once every 3 days. And from there, the drudgery reduced, the time input on the farm reduced, yields went up, and for all the messages that I received, I had become a hero, just like that. So go ahead, you have a unique opportunity to showcase the change.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kofi. I hope Tom is answered. I think the remaining question is from Dr. Sela Malanga. If you can unmute yourself and put on your video. Or I can ask the question. She asked, she said, this is very interesting, but my worry is on resistance with regular use of pesticides and herbicides. Isn't resistance a problem in CA? I think Dr. Ayuke can answer the question.
Yeah. Okay, Frederick, you go on, but I will seriously come in there.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted Kofi Boa also to interject as well.
Okay.
Of course, some of these things that we do, we have to showcase them. In fact, farmers, like Dr. Boa said, they learn by seeing. In fact, sometimes you find that a picture can speak much better than the words. When a farmer sees something with the eye, then he's actually able to know that this is what we need to do. Of course, in the context of the CA, there are quite a number of things that we actually have to consider. Is the farmer able to do that? What are the options that these farmers have? What options do we also have? Somebody who is resource endowed might be able to use the herbicides on a large scale. Somebody who is less endowed has the option of using less of that and then can also have another option. Like when we talk about the use of herbicide, this is largely to suppress the growth of the weeds, the unwanted weeds on the farm. We want the crop, but we don't want the weed to actually choke our plants. So initially, we can actually start by using the herbicides to ensure that we clear the land, if we are capable of doing that. On the other hand, Kofi will tell you that mechanically also, if you talk about mechanization, you don't need to also use the herbicides. You just kill the plants. There's a way in which you can actually do, he'll actually talk about it, I believe. But then you suppress these plants, and then in the process, you actually have got the dead mulch coming in here. So this is actually some of the options that when we are working with the farmers, or we want to work with the farmers, then we actually have to be prepared to give them option, and we have to also be prepared to answer to their curiosity. The question that they ask, are we actually able to show them? Hope you can interject.
Okay, thank you very much, Frederick. The point is that if you have a CA promoter who is just preaching herbicide, 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 send that person to the grave. Perfect. The point is that, like Frederick said, all that you are trying to do is to create conducive environment for your crop to grow. And when he was speaking, you heard him right. He said, initially. So what is happening is that There are several ways of doing it without a chemical. We have the slash mulch system, and in doing that, we have been teaching that the way you do it is taking time to slash to the ground so that the mother weed never ever comes again. But you see, what has happened is that there are instances where farmers are starting on a very densely populated weedy field. And you know, human labor now across several parts of Africa has become so scarce and inefficient. The youth is not interested in farming anymore for several reasons, and the elderly are finding it very difficult to cope with some of these things. So what we do is to just emphasize or teach judicious use of herbicides, and we say that that has to be the very last option. But the point is, initially, when you are confronted with this dense vegetation and there is no way out, the best option is to go in for the herbicide, get your mulch, plant through, and commit yourself to managing the system without that reliance on herbicide. Not herbicide alone. We talk about minimizing external input usage in CA, and it is when you are able to get to that point that CA becomes very, very profitable. And so there are several instances you don't need a herbicide, but in some cases, you definitely have to use that as an entry point. And when you're able to enter the door, you close it behind you. But if you look at conventional farming these days, they will do all the soil manipulation, still go on with glyphosate to kill the weeds, and dump residual herbicides in there. And of course, in the no-till system, the CA system, residual herbicides don't work because these are herbicides that have to come in contact with the moist soil. But in CA, that moist soil is covered with mulch. And therefore, if you invest in residual herbicides, you're wasting your time, you're wasting money. And so CA, in effect, restricts you in terms of herbicide usage. But that notwithstanding, there are instances where for you to start the whole process, if you do not have the roller crimper to bring down the weeds and settle that, and labor to clear the land way to the ground, as we teach people in the slash mulch system, then the immediate thing to do is just for the initial stage, fall on the herbicide and stay away from that. And so once you have done it, then we talk about, I mean, if you don't have headache, do you go take painkiller? No. And so you only go for the painkiller when everything else, you have taken a rest, your headache is not going, you have drank so much water, the headache is not going, then you are prompted to take a pill. You have done that. You don't live on the painkiller for life. And that is exactly what is happening. If we are not able to use those systems of crimping, the systems of slashing way to the ground so that the weeds that are there do not come up, then the immediate option is for that very first time, knock it down. And that is why these days we teach judicious use of herbicide. Earlier on, we were teaching complete exclusion. But now that we realize the limitations as far as labor is concerned, that is where we then went back to teach judicious use of herbicide in the very initial stage and impress on farmers not to tie themselves to the use of herbicides.
Thank you, Dr. Kofi. I think we can take the last question, and if we can be very brief because we are running out of time. Roland, you have raised your hand. You can unmute yourself and ask.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's very close to my heart. First of all, I'm from Angola, from an area, Luanga-Mavinga National Park. It's actually 94,000 square kilometers. It's twice the size of France. It's in the catchment of the Okavango and the Zambezi, and it's in the African water tower area. Now, its water tower is basically the natural area of water storage. The water storage is held in peat bogs. Now, we work very closely with an NGO called Akadir, Antonio Chapita, and his work on eco-agriculture. And it's vitally important. It really is important for us in the water tower area. I'll tell you why. Because first of all, the water tower is, as I said, it's a natural water storage. It's stored in the peat bog. Now, the peat bogs are also huge carbon sinks. So when it comes to climate change, peat bogs are incredibly important. But there's another problem. The problem is with slash and burn agriculture, with people going into those areas, because malaria was always a problem. People didn't go in there. But now you've got coartem, you've got various medicines you can take, and also with the malaria, with tsetse flies. So people are going in there that didn't go in there before. And, you know, technology has changed. It's much easier to make a fire today. In fact, just simple matches have changed technology, so you can make fires easily. Now, if you burn peat bog, it does the reverse. It releases carbon dioxide. So now it's no longer an area to store carbon dioxide. It's a place of major release. So eco-agriculture in those areas are critically important for water conservation as well as for climate change issues. And as Akadir, and it would be, I think I need to post their contact details as Anthony Chapita, because I'm sure you guys have a huge amount to share with them, and I'm sure we have issues that we are dealing with that might be able to assist you as well. But you know, for me, habitat destruction is far greater threat to biodiversity, things like poaching. So specific, like poaching rhino, yes, it's a very important thing. But if you have slash and burn agriculture and you destroy the peat bogs and you destroy the sink for the carbon and the water storage, it's going to have far greater impact than for example, hunting rhino elephant. Those are important. They are, how can I say, they are flagship species, but we tend to overfocus. And I think that eco-agriculture for me is the most critical aspect related to the management of our national park in Angola. That's my opinion.
So Robert, I mean, this is a very good submission, and
Yes.
I think we appreciate so much what is happening, and if we're able to stop slashing and burning over there, I mean, that much carbon stored in soil will be so good for mankind, for humankind.
Yes.
Yeah. So we encourage them to continue.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, and I will now welcome Johan to do the closing remarks. It has been a pleasure to host you. You two have been great lecturers for me, and I will forever be thankful. And thank you for accepting our invitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert and the team. We feel honored to have also come in. Thank you.
I would like to thank Dr. Ayuke and Dr. Boa for being such good lecturers to my 3, soon to be 4 young colleagues from Rwanda. It is it's a pleasure to work with them, and it's also a pleasure to take this first step in collaboration with the Howard Buffett No-Till Center, as well as with the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture. Wonderful to work with you. You have really tonight reconnected us with the soil, and it was a beautiful blend of philosophy and science, and yeah, just learned a lot tonight. And I think the main thing that we can take from this is that conservation, you know, we cannot practice conservation when people are hungry, and we don't have to. So thank you for this story of hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, then.